Over the centuries, Catholic practices have evolved, and some traditions that were once staples of the faith have quietly faded away. In this video, we're exploring 10 things Catholics don't do anymore. Practices that once shaped daily devotion, but have since slipped into history. From the quirky to the solemn, these forgotten traditions offer a window into the past. Now, let's take a look. Number 10. The Midnight Fast. This practice was a Catholic tradition. No food or drink from midnight until communion at Mass, honoring the Eucharist. Set by the 1917 canon law, it often meant over 12 hours of fasting. It's gone now because Pope Pius XII reduced it to 3 hours, and Pope Paul VI set it at 1 hour before communion. Proponents of this change say it ensures more people can participate in the Eucharist without undue hardship. But some Catholics argue that the drastic reduction diminishes the reverence and preparation once associated with receiving the Eucharist. They argue that the watering down of Catholic discipline has been harmful to the Church. Number 9. The Feast of the Circumcision. This feast day was celebrated on January 1st and commemorated Jesus' circumcision 8 days after his birth, per Jewish law. It was a major feast in the Catholic Church for centuries, emphasizing Christ's humanity and obedience to the law. Established in the early Church, it gained prominence in the Roman calendar by the Middle Ages. However, after the Second Vatican Council, the 1969 revision of the liturgical calendar replaced it with the Solemnity of Mary. Critics say it diluted a Christ-centered feast. Supporters argue it aligns with modern theology. Number 8. Public processions on Rogation Days. These processions were traditional Catholic rituals held on April 25th and the 3 days before Ascension Thursday. They involved clergy and laity walking through fields, singing litanies, and praying for God's blessing on crops and protection from calamities. Participants carried crosses, banners, and relics, often stopping to bless the land. They've largely faded since the 20th century. The 1969 liturgical reforms made Rogation Days optional, reflecting a shift from rural life as urbanization grew. Modern Catholics favor masses or private prayers over processions, though some rural parish groups still revive them. Number 7. The Index of Forbidden Books. This was a list maintained by the Catholic Church from 1559 to 1966, banning works deemed heretical, immoral, or dangerous to faith, like writings by Luther or Voltaire. It aimed to protect doctrine in an era of religious upheaval, requiring Catholics to avoid these books without special permission. Enforced by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, it reflected a defensive stance against the upheavals of the Reformation. It's no longer in use because the Church ended it in 1966 under Pope Paul VI. In 1995, the Vatican compiled a list of important films, opting to recommend content instead of dissuading consumption. Number 6. The Lenten Veil. This was a large fabric draped over altars, crosses, or statues in Catholic churches during Lent, especially from Passion Sunday to Good Friday. Dating back to the Middle Ages, it hid sacred images to focus on penance and Christ's suffering, symbolizing mourning and spiritual deprivation. Often plain or adorned with somber scenes, it heightened anticipation for Easter's unveiling. It's rarely used now due to liturgical changes in the 1960s. The 1970 Roman Missal dropped mandatory veiling, favoring simpler Lenten practices. Modern churches prioritize accessibility and less ritual complexity, though some traditional parishes still use it. Number 5. The Feast of the Holy Innocents and the Boy Bishop. This feast day, on December 28th, commemorates the children killed by King Herod. In medieval Europe, it featured a boy bishop, where a choir boy was dressed as a bishop, led processions, and even preached, symbolizing humility and the innocence of the slain. It was a playful inversion of authority tied to Christ's exaltation of the lowly. It fell out of favor after the Reformation, when Protestant critiques in the Council of Trent curbed such frivolous customs to standardize liturgy. By the 16th century, it was largely abandoned, though some traditionalist enclaves briefly revived it. Number 4. Kissing a bishop's ring. This practice was a gesture of respect and reverence, rooted in medieval tradition. The ring, given during a bishop's consecration, symbolized his spiritual authority and marriage to the church. By the 11th century, kissing it, often alongside kneeling, mirrored feudal customs of honoring lords, acknowledging the bishop's role as a successor to the apostles. It was common among laity and clergy until the 20th century. It fell out of favor after the Second Vatican Council, when the Church sought less hierarchical, more egalitarian tones. Pope Paul VI simplified papal regalia in 1968, and many bishops discouraged the practice to emphasize service over pomp. Number 3. Churching women after childbirth. The practice of churching was a Catholic ritual where women, after giving birth, received a blessing to mark their return to church. Rooted in Jewish purification laws and early Christian practice, it involved a priest blessing the mother, typically 40 days postpartum, thanking God for her safety and purifying her, though it wasn't about sin. Common by the Middle Ages, it was a formal rite in the 1962 Roman ritual. It fell out of favor in the 1960s, like so much else on this list. The 1970s liturgical reforms dropped it, favoring inclusive rites like infant baptism blessings. Today, it's rare, though some traditionalists still request it. Number 2. The priestly maniple. This was a liturgical vestment in the Catholic Church, a narrow strip of fabric worn over the priest's left forearm during Mass. Originating in Rome by the 6th century, it evolved from a practical handkerchief for wiping sweat into a symbol of the priest's labor and sorrow in Christ's service. Made of silk and matching the chasuble, it was mandatory in the Tridentine Mass. It's not used anymore because 1960s liturgical reforms simplified vestments. The 1969 Roman Missal made it optional, and most priests dropped it, favoring streamlined rites over ornate symbolism. Traditionalists, like those using the 1962 Missal, still wear it, but mainstream practice sees it as an outdated relic of pre-modern liturgy. Number 1. Asperges before Mass. This was a pre-Mass rite in the Catholic Church, where the priest sprinkled holy water on the congregation, altar, and clergy, accompanied by the chant, Asperges me. Dating to the 9th century, it symbolized purification and penance, preparing worshippers for the Eucharist. Common in the Tridentine Mass, it occurred before Sunday High Mass. The 1969 Missal replaced it with the simpler penitential act within Mass, integrating the cleansing theme without a separate ritual. The shift favored streamlined liturgy and broader participation over elaborate preambles. While optional in the 1962 rite and still used by traditionalists, it's rare in modern practice.